Welcome to WADL TV. You're watching Detroit Wants to Know, and I'm Steve Hood. My guest today is Vin Johnson of the Vin Johnson Law Firm, Johnson Law, PLLC. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Steve. How you
Good
doing,
to see you.
man?
Tell me, who is Vin Johnson?
Vin Johnson's been a lawyer in the Detroit metropolitan community for over 25 years, Steve.
25 years. What kind of cases have you tried?
Well, personal injury cases, some of the biggest cases that you've heard about, I've been fortunate enough to be involved in.
Tell me one of them.
Well, one of them happened just a few years ago here in Wayne County down in Detroit, where I represented the family of a gentleman who had been brain injured and was a quadriplegic in an accident from many years ago. And then when he got sick and left the facility, they took him in an ambulance, and there was a huge crash between the ambulance and a garbage truck, a waste management garbage truck, and ultimately resulted in a $14.1 million verdict to his family because the defendants thought they would try to tell the jury that someone like my client couldn't suffer pain.
$14.1 million.
Yes, sir.
That's huge. Tell me something. How do you get prepared for that? Where'd you go to law school? Where'd you go to undergrad?
I graduated from Kalamazoo College over in Kalamazoo, Michigan, a small Division III school in 1983, and then I came to Detroit and fell in love with my city. And so I've been in the D ever since 1983, went to U of D Law School, clerked downtown, got my first job downtown, and then worked at a number of firms, but for the last 16 years worked with the Feiger Law Firm as Jeffrey's law partner, and started my own firm about 5 months ago.
Okay. Now, I saw on your resume that you've lectured to law schools. Tell me about that.
I'm involved at U of D through a number of their programs. One of them is called the American Inns of Court program. It just teaches young law students kind of how to be a real lawyer, stand up on your feet in front of a judge, in front of a jury, and do what I've been very blessed to do for 25 years.
Okay, what do you see, these young kids coming through law school, if you could tell them anything, what would you tell them?
Have honesty, have integrity, be yourself, and have passion and respect for your clients. And we gotta, I think in any business, but especially in our business is to help people. That's the number one thing. And that's what I think that we do at Johnson Law, is we care, we listen, and then we fight for our people till the end.
What makes a good lawyer? I mean, as of late in Detroit, we've seen lawyers being brought before the Attorney Grievance Commission for a myriad of items. We just had one in the paper where a lawyer was representing both sides in a real estate transaction. What is this? What makes a good lawyer?
That's very sad. To me, what makes a good lawyer is some of the qualities that we were just talking about. It's someone who cares about people first and foremost, and somebody who will have honesty, integrity, and represent that person to the best of their ability. And yet, at the same time, Steve, have respect for the system itself. And I think sometimes what happens in any business, but especially in law, when there's money involved and there's power involved or people involved, sometimes people tend to cut corners just to make a buck. Sometimes people cut corners just to win. And there's a higher principle involved here, and it's people and the law. People
and the law. Okay, how do people get in touch with Johnson Law?
Well, they call my number, 855-VEN-FIGHTS, F-I-G-H-T-S.
855-VEN-FIGHTS. I saw that your logo has boxing gloves.
Yes, sir.
Do you box, or is that just like a metaphor for being a tough guy?
Well, I do not
Mama
box.
said knock you out.
Well, Mama did. Grew up in Saginaw, so I learned how to fight from an early age, in the sense that, you know, I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. My parents were teachers, educators. And so I learned how to work hard, and that's exactly what I've done, and that's translated into sports, where I obviously wasn't the most gifted athlete, so I had to work hard for that, and went to school and got my degrees and had to work hard for that, and it's just translated into my legal career. It doesn't take, it's not some magical word that you use. A lot of people think that you mystify juries or make things up. It's the exact opposite. It's being yourself, believing in people, believing what you say, knowing your case, and presenting it to the jury on behalf of your client.
Okay, tell me this. With Michigan's limits on payouts, how do you survive? I mean, we see all these billboards all over the freeway, all these personal injury, auto accident lawyers, Jim Bob. I see them on the street corners too, the little ones. I mean, they're inundated by signs. A sign company must love your profession.
Right,
but
now
how do you guys exist within those limits?
Well, as you know, under Michigan medical malpractice law, Michigan product liability law, there are limitations on damages. A lot of people don't know that. So you're right, it's very small. And the answer is you do a good job for your client, and
What are
hopefully
the
you do well.
limitations on damages?
In a medical malpractice case, most cases for the what's called non-economic damages, for all the suffering that somebody goes through from the time of the malpractice for the rest of their life, is usually worth nothing more than about $413,000. In a very, very few instances, if there's brain injury, it can be up as high as about $710,000, but usually it's about $413,000, Steve. This,
413.
it's a travesty of justice. It is absolutely an unconstitutional law, and unfortunately, we've yet to have a Michigan Court of Appeals or Michigan Supreme Court panel strong enough to stand up to what I think is just an absolute false and utterly deplorable law.
When we come back, I want to talk about personal injury.
Okay.
All right? Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back. I'm sitting here with Ven Johnson, learning about the law. Ven Fights. Welcome back to Detroit Wants to Know. You're watching TV 38 WADL. I'm here with my good friend Ven Johnson. Ven, tell me this. If I walk down a sidewalk in Detroit and I slip in a hole, I trip in a hole, and I bust my head, crack my head, who do I sue?
Well, that's a great question. First and foremost, what you need to know is because of a change in our law by the Michigan Supreme Court a number of years ago, the answer is you have a tough row to hoe with anybody. And that is, even if there's a gaping hole and you fall in that hole, there's this doctrine that we are, in my opinion, misapplying and misusing now called open and obvious. And even if it's the city's fault for having that, right now, basically, the city gets to sit back and say, well, you should have seen it. And a judge, not a jury, Steve, a judge throws that case out of court. Very sad.
Okay. Let's say I have a piece of property in Detroit. There's a sidewalk in front of it. Now, let's say I have a very valuable piece of property in Detroit. There's a sidewalk in front of it. The city of Detroit didn't fix it. There's a little lip. It's the middle of winter. Some old lady comes and trips and falls. Okay?
Right.
Can she sue me?
She can try, but the fact of the matter is the sidewalk itself is owned by the city. And there's special rules that we have. It's called governmental immunity that protects the city against most lawsuits. We have what's called a 2-inch rule. So basically, if it's more than a 2-inch discrepancy in the sidewalk and it's existed for a number of days and months, then you could go ahead and try to sue the city. But as I told you about this thing called open and obvious, most people in that situation, Steve, are going to lose that case, sadly.
What if a bus comes and hits my car and causes me bodily injury?
Yeah, well, those are type of cases that I've been handling literally almost every day.
So
for
I
the
can
last
still
16
sue
years.
because that bus is not open and obvious.
That bus is not an open and obvious, and that's part of an auto accident. If it's a city bus, a DDOT bus, handled a number of those. Very tragic accidents where folks are in crosswalks on green lights with city buses running them over and killing them.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is you can sue the city for that. It's called, again, it's an exception to governmental immunity. It's called a vehicle exception to governmental immunity, and you just prove that the bus was negligent, that you did nothing wrong, and then they would owe you for the amount of what the jury finds to be reasonable for the injuries that you've suffered.
Let's take another example. Let's say a person walks into a bar. He's got a beautiful woman on his arm. Some guy looks at her the wrong way, said something untoward. So the guy is going to defend his woman's honor, and he punches the guy, knocks him down. The guy falls down and somehow breaks an arm, falling down. Does the guy who fell down get to sue the guy who knocked him down?
Well, you certainly could. In situations like assaults is what we would call that in civil law. That's also would spill over potentially into criminal law. Usually, though, folks don't have any type of way to pay for those types of things because insurance will never cover an intentional act. So could you sue? Yes. Are you likely to get something substantial for your injuries? Unfortunately, no.
One more question. Somebody breaks into a house. I have a gun, okay? I shoot the guy. Can he sue me for shooting him?
That has happened throughout the United States. Yes, sir, he can. Yes, sir,
Really?
he can.
Even though the person broke into my house?
Yes, sir, he can.
So which side would you take? Do I call you before? Do we race to call Ven?
That's a great question.
So I got a guy breaking into my house and you're telling me he can sue me?
The answer is if you were to utilize more force than what was necessary to protect yourself and your property, and usually the law shows and holds that if you shoot somebody with a gun that was unarmed, yeah, it's more force than you needed to use. And
But what if I felt that they were foreboding and scary, and it was like 3 a.m. in the morning?
Well, therein lies your dispute within the court. But I will tell you that typically, no, I would not represent somebody who's breaking into somebody else's house to steal stuff. That's not
And
the
that
kind of law
goes-
I do.
And that goes to ethics.
Well, sure it does.
That goes to ethics.
And integrity.
Okay, I've got another question. Because the first question always happens, okay? That whole property thing, that's happening all
Sure it
the
has.
time. What if a spouse hits another spouse?
Mhm.
Okay, the one spouse that's got hit puts a PPO on the guy, he violates the PPO. Do you sue the guy? What do you do?
Well, you could. Again, the answer is, usually when you ask me a question, could you sue? The answer is pretty much anybody can sue anybody for anything. But what really matters is it a good case? Is it going to lead to a favorable outcome to one person or another? In a spouse versus spouse situation, the answer is most attorneys, I think, would agree with me. It's not going to result in a great jury verdict situation for one over another because it's a marital dispute between two people. But again, could one sue the other? The answer is yes, they could for their injuries that they sustain. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, you've taken it down to the gut level of personal injury. Tell us once again how to contact Johnson Law.
855-VEN-FIGHTS, Steve.
855-VEN-FIGHTS.
Yes, sir.
And that's VEN.
Yes, sir, it is.
Fights, for all of our people that can't spell out there. One more thing. Do you see personal injury on the rise?
Well, in terms of numbers of lawsuits, the answer is no, because of some pretty bad changes in the law for at least victim rights, and what I would say for the civil rights of people in our community. Michigan has really changed the laws, the Michigan Supreme Court primarily, and the numbers are dropping significantly. And the problem that I have with that, Steve, is what it does is it denies people access to the courts for real and egregious injuries. And unfortunately, there are people that are being turned away by our courts right now simply because other people claim there's too many lawsuits and the public doesn't know that that's not true.
Okay. Well, then, Johnson, with the limits on liability and all that, it's super important to choose a super attorney.
Yes, sir.
1-248-855-VEN-FIGHTS. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Ven Johnson. This is Steve Hood. Detroit Wants to Know. We'll be right back.